Welcome to League of Lit, where we discuss books, adaptations, and anything else we wish to talk about and tie it to lit because we can.
Oh boy, can we.
Oh boy. Oh girl, I guess, considering what we're talking about today instead of oh boy.
I guess.
That's a little silly, but you know.
I mean, if you think about it, with what we're talking about today, oh boy is still
It still
valid.
works. Yes, it still works.
It is still valid.
Still
so.
valid.
But to make sure that we have covered our bases, it is a truth universally acknowledged that we are not a spoiler-free podcast.
No, not at all. We love spoilers.
I mean, even though today is one of those times where this has been out for centuries, you probably should have read it by now, unless you're in high school and it has not been assigned to you yet. Yeah, this is a book that you probably should have read at some point in your educational career.
I hope.
I mean, I only read it in high school because it was one of the options, because I had Miss Dryden for American Lit, and she gave us an option for one of these, and this was one of the options, and it's what I chose.
I read it in like middle
American
school,
Lit.
but that was like I made the choice to read it.
Well, and I know I would read it before I went to high school, but like when it was time to like read it in school, because I would say that this is a pretty good piece of American literature.
Oh, yeah.
And what we're talking about is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott.
Yeah. It was published September 30th, 1868. So it's been out. You've had time.
Loads.
None of you were born before 1868. So
this is true.
Well,
unless you're a time traveler.
I was about to say. Let us know.
If you are, please share your secrets with us.
I'd love to know.
But this is set in New England during the time of the Civil War or war between the states, depending on where you grew up and what you were told.
It's in Massachusetts, in what is inspired by Concord.
Yes.
Very nice little area. Massachusetts is so pretty. So it focuses on the March family, specifically the 4 March sisters in age descending order. Yes, right? Yes.
Maybe.
No, I'm just confused. Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy March.
Yes. But technically, the book is kind of told from Jo's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a level of meta to this book in the sense that we find out towards the end that Jo writes a book about growing up with her sisters, and that's essentially what this book is.
Yeah,
so it has that
book.
Exactly. It's a meta story, and I think it's a really fun trope just to use in general.
Yeah, it's also considered semi-autobiographical because Louisa May Alcott used her own life as the inspiration.
This covers a like broad portion of the March girls' lives. So when we first meet them, Meg, who's the oldest, is 16, Jo is 15, Beth is 13, and Amy is 12.
Babies.
But by the end of the book, they are adults. So this covers a very large chunk of time.
Yes.
But in the grand scheme of things, the book is really not all that long.
No, it's like 790 pages. Something like that.
Like the audiobook itself, it takes like 5 hours to listen to.
Yeah.
This is similar to how like Pride and Prejudice is 61 chapters, but they're not very long chapters. Little Women is 54 chapters, but they're also not very long.
Yeah.
The number sounds daunting, but it's really not that big.
It's really, and once you start reading it, like Louisa May Alcott is not a wordy writer. She's not super loquacious. So it's not going to be like reading Lord of the Rings or something.
Exactly. And then another fun fact about this book is that it is on the banned book list for being a feminist book.
How dare they?
Because it has that feminist nature of challenging the traditional roles of a woman, specifically for that time period, because that's not necessarily traditional now, but it it's a huge thing for the fact that like Jo wants to be a writer. She wants to make money off of writing, and that's how she wants to support herself and her family.
Yeah.
Where Meg is probably the most traditional of the four, where it is her dream to be a mom and a wife and a homemaker. Amy also has some big dreams with wanting to be an artist. And then Beth is just, happy to be here.
She really is, though. She's like, I am content to just be at home.
Yeah, out of the four girls, she is the most content. And then as far as other characters that are important and play a big part, we have Theodore Lawrence, or Laurie, or Teddy if you're Jo.
If you're Jo.
Because Jo is the only person who is allowed to call him Teddy. And he's the neighbor boy.
The neighbor boy. The rich neighbor boy.
Yep. And he lives with his grandfather, Mr. Lawrence, who is apparently friends with
Robert.
In all honesty, it's unclear if it's Marmie's father or if it's Mr. March's father.
Who knows?
But it's one of the girls' grandfathers that Mr. Lawrence was friends with. So that's somewhat of the connection.
Another important character is Marmee, who is the girl's mother, who they call Marmee. Everybody calls her Marmee.
And then we have some side characters that they play a part, but they don't really have a whole lot of, quote, screen time.
Yeah.
So, but you have John Brooke, who is Laurie's tutor and becomes Meg's husband.
Oh.
And we'll dive into that in a minute because there's a little bit to dive into there. And then you have Hannah, who helps around the house, is kind of like a nanny slash like
housekeeper,
yeah. For the March family, as Mr. March is off at war. And then like you hear things and you kind of get to see a little bit of like Meg's circle of friends who tend to be on the richer side of life.
Yes.
Which challenges Meg a lot because the March family is not very well off. Some of that, if I understand the book correctly, Mr. March is a chaplain in the military.
Yes.
And that obviously does not make a whole lot of money. And Marmee does what she can to provide for the family. But again, they can only do so much.
They seem, for the most part, content. There are those little moments in those little pockets, and we'll talk about them as they sort of happen. But there are those little moments in those little pockets of everybody but Beth being a little discontented with their life.
Yes.
I feel like Meg more specifically than anybody.
Absolutely. I would say out of the four girls, Meg is probably the most materialistic.
Which is so interesting because
it really
she marries
is.
a teacher.
She marries a very sweet man, but he also knows that he's not going to make a whole lot. And he lets her know that he doesn't have a whole lot to offer when they get to that point.
Yeah.
But like it's a very sweet like way that whole relationship comes about.
I like Johnny's very sweet.
Mm-hmm.
And he obviously loves Meg a lot. But like, again, we'll get to all of that when we get there.
Yes.
I guess we could start sort of talking about adaptations, and that will definitely help us fill the story in.
Yep. So in kind of our little bit of fashion that we've kind of established here, we'll go in order. Before we get to what most people claim as like the end all be all adaptation, you have 3 movies that came out before that one. So you had one that came out in 1933, one that came out in 1949, and then one that came out in 1978. I know nothing else other than that's when they came out.
Did you know too that there were also 2 silent films that came out before that?
No, I didn't. I missed that in my research.
There was one in 1917 and one in 1918. They were both silent film versions of this.
Interesting. I'd actually be really interested to see those.
Yeah.
Where the other 3 that I've named off so far, I don't know that I have interest in seeing them.
No, I'm not. One of them has Katharine Hepburn as Jo. I think that's the 1933 one.
Okay.
And then they made Little Men, too.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I don't know about this.
which is another book in the Little Women quote series. It's kind of a series, but not really.
Sort of.
It's a companion book, if you will. So that leads us into the 1994 movie that stars Winona Ryder as Jo, Christian Bale as Laurie, Susan Sarandon as Marmee, Claire Danes as Beth, and Kirsten Dunst as the young version of Amy. Those are like the quote, like big name recognizable actors. Obviously, there are other characters because we've named a bunch of them already. But as far as actors that most people would recognize, that's what we got.
Yeah. And it was directed by Gillian Armstrong. So it's really interesting. It seems to be that a lot of these are directed by women. Of course, not necessarily back way before this adaptation, but
right.
It seems to be that women prefer to make this movie, which is good. I mean,
it's a very strong book for women and very pro female like empowerment, and which is great considering the time period that it's in. It's not something you'd really think about.
Yeah.
At least as far as like characterizing that time period.
With this movie, I rewatched this one because obviously I've seen it when I was a kid. It came out in 1994. I was 2 when it came out. So
I think the last time I saw it was right after seeing the 2019 version. So,
and what a stark difference.
Yes. So this is, but both of those movies are true to time period.
Yes, no,
which
they are.
Not all of the adaptations we're talking about today are true to time period. So this one is, and a lot of people consider this one to be like the adaptation for the book.
People do.
It's a weird thing in the book community where they get stuck and attached to one specific adaptation, and there can never be another adaptation to ever do the book justice. And I don't understand that.
I disagree because, like, as much as I like the 1994 adaptation, I like the 2019 one better.
I think because I did a comparison and contrast on my blog after the 2019 came out. At the end of it, I could not say, oh, I like this one better than the other. I have things that I like about each one.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with them all coexisting together.
I mean, I don't know. It is what it is. I just have less that I like about the 1994 version, mostly as far as some of the casting goes, than I do about the 2019 version.
What about the casting bothers you about the 94?
I can't stand Christian Bale as Laurie.
Really?
I can't. It doesn't make sense to me. He doesn't strike me as a Laurie. And watching it, I was like, I don't know. It's Batman. I was like, I don't know. You're not. He doesn't strike me. There's something about, and like specifically again, this is just going to be a compare and contrast of 2019 versus 1994. But
it's fine.
There's something about Timothy Chalamet. I can never say his name. Timothy Chalamet. That feels more. It's just he's much more naturally Laurie to me than Christian Bale is.
Okay.
And I don't know, like, if it's like that sort of youthful arrogance is not the right word, but it's the word I'm going to use.
I mean, it fits.
Yeah. But he's also just very honest. And I don't know, Christian Bale just doesn't hit me that way.
See, I love the chemistry that Winona Ryder and Christian Bale have as Jo and Laurie. And I think it does well, especially for it being done in the 90s.
Yeah. I mean, for what it was.
Yes. I think for if that version had been made today with those same actors, not with them being aged.
No, obviously.
But you get what I mean.
Yeah.
If that had been done today, it would not have the same potency that the 2019 has, because the 2019 matches today's vibes, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But the 1994 version is told in a chronological order, where 2019 has flashbacks that are juxtaposed with
we'll get into
where
that
they
when we
end.
get
We'll talk more about that later, because
there's
there's another
one.
Right. Because there's another adaptation that does that as well. So we'll talk about that in a second. The costuming sticks very true to the time period. There is like little to no individualization that exists. And out of all the adaptations that are movies specifically, because we do have some web series we're going to talk about, this is the one that has the most lines for Beth.
Yeah. Which I like Claire Danes, but she's also not my favorite Beth. So there's that for you.
Yeah, she's not my favorite Beth either. But she does have the most lines.
She plays Beth in like almost as if like Beth is never. She's just too juvenile with Beth, which is interesting because Claire Danes doesn't look juvenile. So she plays this girl who's like, 13 to, whatever. And I'm like, you look like you're like 25 trying to play a 13-year-old in it, but you're acting like you're 8. It didn't work for me. There's something about Claire Danes' portrayal of Beth that really, I was like, I don't understand. And of course, again, it's been a long time since I watched this. So as a 28-year-old, my thought process is a little different now than it probably was the first time.
Right.
And of course, again, I've seen other versions of it now that are, to me, more well done. But again, it's not the 90s anymore. So.
Right. And I will say another thing that I think that the 94 adaptation does really well is show the relationship of Frederick Bear and Joe.
Yeah.
And how Frederick Bear influenced Joe's writing and just how she developed as a person, where other adaptations just kind of slightly gloss over it.
Yeah.
Because for whatever reason, everyone thinks Joe and Laurie should be the end-all be-all. And I'm just going to go ahead and throw it out there with my controversial, no, it's not.
No, it's not. It would never work. They would literally kill each other.
They are too much of the same person for it to be a healthy, growing relationship.
They're more like identical twin siblings. You know what I mean? Like, obviously not identical of their face, but...
Yeah, it's like they're the same age and in that, like, same stage of life.
And they have the same mindset on a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And not that
Which some people would think that would be great, but you almost need somebody to, like, challenge you in your life.
I feel like a relationship can't work without a little controversy. Obviously, it shouldn't be anything like excessive, but like,
right,
you need something to sort of discuss. Otherwise, you're just gonna be sitting there next to each other, like, yeah, we both like that. All right, that's the end of that. Like,
right.
So, and yeah, no, you and I both feel the same way about that. And you mentioned Frederick Bear, who is, we should explain, a professor from Germany, who Joe meets in New York City when she moves there.
Mm-hmm.
And she does eventually marry him.
Yes. And it should also be established, because there are other adaptations that don't, for whatever reason, take this into account. He is like 20 years her senior.
Yeah, he's a middle-aged man.
Which, for the time period that it's set in and the time period that it's written in, that's not weird at all. No. It just feels weird to us modern audiences because that's not super common these days.
Yeah, which is why it's not nearly done that way as much in newer adaptations.
I will say this like slightly bothers me because, so in rereading the book before this, I don't know that I have a very like defined opinion of Laurie's shift from Joe to Amy as far as like his interest in pursuing a romantic relationship. But in the 94, it feels like it's very much painted as a shift of convenience.
Yeah, I can agree with that in that one.
It doesn't feel like it's like Laurie actually likes Amy.
Yeah.
For Amy. It's I want to still be connected to the March family. So here's Amy.
I feel like every adaptation does this a little differently. And I think that there are definitely ones, again, that we'll talk about when we get to them, that do it better. But I do agree that in this one, it's kind of like, Amy likes me. Amy will work.
Yeah.
And I think that's another reason why I don't like Christian Bale as Laurie. And that's not his fault. He didn't write it that way. But right. I'm like, ugh, it's just, should like her. Should like her a little bit.
But I don't even like Amy in this one.
Oh, no. And the fact that, like, they did Kirsten Dunst's young Amy, and then Samantha Mathis, I think, plays older Amy.
I don't remember. I didn't write it down.
Yeah, Samantha Mathis plays the older Amy, and they, like, switch them in the middle of the movie, and I'm like, oh, I noticed that. They don't look at all alike.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, obviously, you grow up and you change as you get older. I still look the same as I did when I was 12. I'm just saying.
I mean, there's always going to be some facial features that follow you as you get older.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I didn't like that either. And that's, again, that's just their choice to.
Right. Well, and the
Not-
thing that I feel like is the quote, like, defining thing that a lot of people seem to get stuck on when it comes to the character of Amy is the limes.
Oh, yeah. Why? Why?
I don't understand why that is the defining moment of the character of Amy March.
I'm sorry. I'm thinking about the limes and I'm like, I mean, I know about the limes. I know what happens with the limes. Why do people care about the limes?
I don't know. I really don't understand.
It's like such a small portion of her life.
Like, sure, it might be like a defining moment of her childhood because she made it into this big dramatic thing. But it's not the defining moment of her whole life. And that seems to be the biggest moment of her character arc in especially this adaptation.
They don't really do that in a lot of the other ones.
No.
Huh. I'm just thinking about the limes and I'm like, I know what happens. I know what the limes are a part of. I don't care. The limes don't do anything. Like, that storyline doesn't do anything for me other than establish that she's a child because she was a child.
Yeah. It's one of those childish things.
Yeah, that everybody has the limes and she can't afford any limes and has promised limes to people and what is that? I don't know. Okay.
It was a form of currency, which, in all honesty, and this could just be because I didn't go to public school until high school, I don't remember that ever being a thing.
Oh, we didn't pay each other with stuff?
I didn't think so.
At least not that I remember.
I think probably the closest thing that we could get to that is the Pokemon trading cards.
And even then, like, it wasn't uncool if you didn't have them. Nobody cared. Exactly. You just weren't part of the group that played with their Pokemon cards at lunch. Which I was not part of the group that played with their Pokemon cards at lunch.
I wasn't in public school at the time that I had Pokemon cards, so that was not a thing for me.
I don't really remember anything like that in public. I mean, we used to like trade things at lunch and stuff, but like typically that was like, you have pickles. I know you don't like pickles. Do you want my thing of weird mashed potatoes for your pickles? Like that. But again, it's not currency. You're just trading because you're kids and you're picky. I don't know. That's weird.
Anything else about the 94?
I mean, I've already given all of my opinions on people I don't like in this movie.
Cool. So moving on in chronological order, that brings us to web series. So we have two different web series that happened in 2014. Both are incomplete.
Yes.
So the first one that came up, where the first episode aired on April 27th in 2014, is the Jo March vlog. There's literally only 7 episodes. I'm really not sure why they gave up. I don't know if they because when I was looking back, like trying to refresh my memory on some of this, because it has been years since I've looked at them, because I watched them as they came out and then poof, it was done. Mm-hmm. The last episode that airs is the episode that's connected to when Meg and Jo go to the theater with Laurie and John Brooke.
Yeah.
But in this version, they go to a Lady Gaga concert. And that was the last episode that the Jo March vlog ever released.
Yeah. I watched the first episode and then I looked and saw that it only had 7 and I went, I'm not doing this. I don't need unfinished things in my life.
And in all honesty, you're not missing much, because I just skimmed through them as a refresher. And this particular adaptation paints Jo as a gross tomboy. Like your stereotypical, I don't care if I get muddy or shower or anything, that all of the gross aspects of your stereotypical tomboy, which is not true for all tomboys. And that's also, and from what I understand of the character of Jo from the book, that's not true of Jo March anyways.
No, I mean, she still understood where who she was and the expectations of society. She didn't always agree with them, but she still understood them.
And would adhere when necessary.
Yeah.
And also in this one, instead of Mr. March being off at war, he seemed to own a bookstore.
Not quite as controversial.
Right, and the bookstore went under, so that's why they're poor.
On brand.
And it didn't quite make sense to me.
Yeah.
And so you'll see this common thing through all of the web series adaptations where they age the characters up a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
So in this one, Joe and Meg are in college and Beth and Amy are in high school.
Yeah.
But they still keep it as they're all sisters. We do have one of these adaptations where they're not all by blood sisters.
Yeah.
And just like what little I like skimmed of this one, I would say the relationship between Joe and Amy is way more juvenile than what it would be if these girls were actually college and high school aged.
Yeah. I think eventually they get to the point where, and you see that in adaptations that stick to the age ranges, but they, eventually you get to the point where there's no point in fighting the way that we fought when we were kids.
Mm-hmm.
We might have little spats, but they're going to be adult spats, like this kind of spats you'd have I assume, with a sister, because I don't have a sister. I have best friends. Does that work? I'm going to go with that. I'm going to compare them to those.
Yeah. Moving on to the next one that was in 2014, which is the March Family Letters. And this is one that they tried to start on their own, but then for the sake of funding, they got adopted by what is now officially known as Pemberley Digital, which is supported by PBS. And this one has 50 episodes, and in a sense, those 50 episodes are very complete. It just doesn't cover the whole book.
Yeah,
so that's where the incompleteness comes from.
Yeah. And I did partials of a lot of these. I think I probably watched 10 episodes in whole, and I just kept picking little.
I think you would really enjoy this adaptation. So the first episode was published on December 25th of 2014. And in this one, we have no Mr. March character. In this one, Marmee is the one that is deployed. And the reason why they started these vlogs is to be video letters to keep Marmee informed while she is deployed. In this one, Joe is tattooed and is a filmmaker, which I think totally works for a modernized Joe. But at the same time, they could have also just gotten away with her continuing to be a writer and not going for the novel. But instead, in this one, they have her as going for the budding filmmaker, writing scripts and whatnot. But with the exception of Amy, Joe, Meg, and Beth are all legal adults in this adaptation. And this adaptation is produced by a Canadian group, and for whatever reason, they felt the need to make it to where it's set in Canada. So this American novel that deals with very American things, in my opinion, as far as the novel goes, because of what the content is.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that they transported it to being Canadian. And I think it works because I think a lot of the themes are, in fact, universal.
Yeah.
But there are differences a little bit, in my opinion.
This is an Anne of Green Gables.
Yeah.
It's the wrong novel.
Right. This adaptation has Meg as a workaholic. I would say that the way that Amy March is portrayed, it really reminds me of Ricky Collins from Lizzie Bennet Diaries.
Wow.
Just in the way, just in the language that she chooses.
Yeah.
It's just the way that it sounds. And so it reminds me of that. And this one has probably the most LGBTQ plus representation of all adaptations. And one of the ways that they do that is they change John Brooke to be Joan Brooke. Because I don't know that they ever truly blanketly define it. But I think my understanding from what I was skimming through, because again, it's been a little bit since I've watched this adaptation, is that they have Meg as a bisexual.
Yeah. I don't, and then from the little bit that I saw of it, I don't think anything was ever fully said. But again, we both just kind of skimmed it before we did this.
Right.
So
I know at one point, because I do remember it, it is stated that Beth is asexual.
I mean, it works.
Like, and I don't think it takes away.
No.
We'll have other adaptations that we talk about for other books where I have opinions of whether or not it actually
Matters.
works for the characters.
Yeah.
Because there's some where you can get away with it, and then there are others where now you really should have just left it alone.
Yeah, it didn't need to be said. Nothing needed to be added.
It did not add to the story or change how you perceived anything.
Yeah.
If anything, it made things more confusing. But that's not the case for this.
Yeah.
But episode 50 ends with the fact that, like, this is the first go round of Beth being sick. And so they're taking time away to focus on getting Beth better. And at the same time, Marmy's come home to help take care of Beth. And while we never see Marmy on camera, it is stated in the last episode that they post that it's possible that they could come back. And they do leave it open for that possibility. But it has been 5 years since that one was posted, because that was posted June 26, 2015. And so it's probably never, ever going to come back, which is sad because I would love to see how the rest of it would play out. But the whole reason why it ended was because they started that project as a way to help keep Marmy informed, and she was now home, so there was no need.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I feel like it will never be brought back.
Nope. But like I said, like, even though it is technically an incomplete adaptation, it feels complete in the way that they wrapped it up.
There's nothing wrong with the way they ended it. So
nope, not at all. The next adaptation started in 2016 and is called The Attic, which is kind of a throw at the fact that the March sisters would like do Joe's plays and whatnot in their attic. And that's also where Joe would write a whole lot, is in the attic of the March house. And so I thought that was a very clever way of, like, okay, this is what they're calling it. It's like,
yeah.
Even in the first episode of this particular adaptation, Joe clearly states that, of how, like, that's where she would do her writing when she was at home, but now she's away at a university. And so that's why she decided to create the channel to document her process of becoming a renowned writer. And this is what she's going to do.
Yeah.
But with The Attic, they split it up into 4 seasons. And so in this adaptation, we have them as college students. So these are not biological sisters. And they have Joe and Beth as roommates, and Amy and Meg as roommates. And then their RA is Marley.
Marley.
So that was their way of getting in a Marmy sort of character without having to be blood relatives.
Yeah.
Season 1 started May 24th of 2016. It covers pretty much like the beginning stuff, and it ends at the end of their semester. But it has where Meg and Marley, who they have as biological sisters in this adaptation, their dad is sick and he's in the Sudan. So it's how do we get them there?
Yeah.
Is like the thing. And you find out that that Marley and John Brooke are going to the Sudan to handle things there. And then season 2 started September 22nd, 2016. It's established as it's Joe's senior year. We find out that Beth has a heart condition. Meg is engaged to John. And Dr. March, we haven't really talked a whole lot about Aunt March so far.
Yeah.
But this is the Aunt March character. And Dr. March insists that Amy gets to study abroad in Paris instead of Joe.
Yeah.
Then season 3 starts April 11th, 2017. Joe is interning in New York. That's where we get to meet a Frederick Bear character, and they call him Reed Bear. But I don't really know that we get a whole lot out of that character existing in this adaptation because we don't get to see him a whole lot. He's in a handful of episodes.
Yeah.
between the third and the fourth seasons. But also in the third season, Meg gets married. Amy's studying abroad, so we get to see some videos from Amy in Paris. We also get to see Amy and Laurie's relationship blossom. We also get to see, so at the end of season 3, Beth dies from her heart condition.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, Laurie thinks it's a great idea to propose at a funeral. Because that's where he decides to propose to Joe.
I didn't get that far.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord. Why? He's a stupid boy.
That he is. And then we move on to season 4, which started March 1st, 2018. And they opened that one up with a video letter from Beth that she recorded before she passed away for Joe. And it's even stated in the video that Beth knows that like Joe's not going to find it for a while. Like, because I guess Beth never told Joe that she did that. But so you get to see that. And so like the first like few episodes, you're seeing that Joe is still in mourning and she's struggling to move on with her life because Beth was such an integral part of that. But also in season 4, we get to see Amy and Laurie get engaged. And we get like, I think it's literally like one video where Reed Bear encourages Joe to write what she knows, essentially. And Joe decides she's going to take what's been the video blog and turn it into a book.
Okay.
The 4th season ends with Joe telling Amy and Meg that that's what she wants to do. And she's essentially asking for their permission.
Okay.
Hey, are you okay with this? Those are all of the web series adaptations that I watched as they came out. And Sierra's just like skimmed.
I have skimmed. I have done my site research. Their site.
I think out of those 3, I think you would enjoy the March Family Letters the most. The Attic is, I would say, it's a decent modernization of it, but I mean, it has its things that it lacks.
Yeah.
But it's also, you know, what can you actually do to like pull this forward?
Yeah.
So, but that brings us to 2017.
Yeah, 2017. So in 2017, BBC did an adaptation for television that was 3 episodes. The original release was they did all 3 episodes in different days. So it was December 26th, 27th, and 28th, 2017. Which, you know, this is a great story to get at Christmas. I think it's a great time to get this story.
Oh, yeah. I mean, to an extent, that's kind of like when the book really opens, is them talking about like what, because they can't, because of their like financial status, they can't necessarily have presents when we first meet them. And so they're choosing what of their like personal flaws is the way that they word it, that they're going to work on.
Yeah. Which is,
and so I think it's an interesting like take on it.
Yeah.
But hey.
But it stars Maya Hawke as Joe, Willa Fitzgerald plays Meg, Catherine Newton plays Amy, and Anne Eloise plays Beth. And it's a really great little cast. The 4 girls work really well together. I watched it a couple weeks ago. It was directed by Vanessa Caswell, and it was like a big chunk of BBC commissioned like 10 other television dramas, and this was one of the things that was part of it. And I thought it was really interesting. It's set, obviously, in Concord, Massachusetts. They filmed this in Ireland.
What?
I know! I was like, how? What? How do you
Movie
make
magic right there?
Ireland and Massachusetts look similar? But they did a good job. I would not have known watching it. But it's really good. The 3-episode thing, obviously, is nice because there's so much of this book. And they do a really good job, and it goes chronologically the way that the book does, and not the way that the 2019 one does, that we'll talk about in a little bit, because it's kind of the weird, odd one amongst all of these adaptations. I liked Maya Hawke as Joe. I think she played Joe well because she didn't again, do sort of the over-exaggeration of the tomboy aspect of Jo.
I feel like Maya Hawke would be a great Jo from the parts that I've seen her play in.
Yes, I love Maya Hawke.
This is one of those adaptations that's like on my list of things to watch. I remember wanting to see it when it came out, but I just didn't have the time.
Do highly recommend. Jonah Hauer-King, I think is how you say his last name. It's a hyphenated last name. Plays Laurie. And he's fun. He's a good Laurie. He's the kind of Laurie that's like, you're like, oh yeah, I can see why. You have like this sort of weird relationship with Jo, and they play a lot more on almost the sexual chemistry of Laurie and Jo in this one.
Okay.
In like the, that there are those little touches and little glances and little moments, and I think the 1994 sort of did that too.
A little bit.
Where there's almost that little moment of like, oh, this might actually happen. And then the way that they do Jo letting him down is it's not nearly as dramatic as some of the other ones are. But she's still definitely like, no, this would never work. Mm-hmm. It would never happen.
Right.
You get a lot more Frederick Bear in this one.
Ooh.
Which I liked. And again, he's not quite as old as the book makes him. But the guy that they got to play Frederick Bear, Mark Stanley, is very good. And I think he does a good job of playing off of Jo in the way that like he's encouraging her to write, and he wants to read her writing, and he wants to work with her on it. And they become really good friends in this house that they live in. And, then he just says the wrong thing. And it is war, because he has told Jo that he doesn't like. And in the way that this one is, he reads her stories that are obviously published anonymously and is talking about them to her without knowing that they're hers, and is talking about how they're not the types of things that he enjoys, and he doesn't understand why people write like that, because at that point she's writing sort of these like saucy, almost raunchy things, because that's what everybody wants after the war. They want to be sort of titillated. And he's like, I don't understand why people write like that. And she's like, oh, well, those are mine. So that's great. Love it. Gotta go. Bye. Like,
I mean, to an extent, like, from the book that Jo doesn't like doing that either.
No.
But she chooses to do it because it makes her money.
Yes. But him saying he doesn't like them still offends her, because it's still her writing. Whether she likes it or not, she is still the one penning it. So it's really interesting. It's very fun. It's very bright adaptation. Everything really felt very bright the whole time. And I think when you watch it, you'll understand maybe what I'm talking about, because it just sounds weird for me to be like, it's bright. But everything's like nice and sunny, and it feels very warm watching it. But it was good. I enjoyed it. And you get a lot more of, like Meg's relationship with John, and you get more Mr. March in this one.
Okay.
Which is nice. The woman who plays Marmee is Emily Watson. She's a little too severe in this adaptation for my taste. She just seems really more angry. And obviously you get in the book, there's a moment where Marmee says to Jo, your temper reminds me of myself, because I'm always angry. And Joe's like, what are you talking about? You are never angry. And I feel like in this one we sort of get the background of that, where like Marmee will go into a room by herself, and you can sort of see that side of Marmee. But even sometimes with the girls, she's very severe. Okay. So that's, it's not bad, it's just not great. But it was a good adaptation. I really enjoyed watching it.
I want to know, because I looked at the cast list. I noticed that Angela Lansbury is Aunt March, and Michael Gambon is Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
What were they like?
Michael Gambon was great. His relationship with Beth was so sweet. And there's like this moment where she comes in and she's playing the piano. And at the beginning of it, you see Laurie playing that piano at one point. And he comes in and he's like, this was your mother's piano. Nobody plays this piano. Because he has a separate piano, because he's a rich man. So he has that piano that's like in sort of the entrance of his house. And then he has like the grand piano. And when Beth comes over to play the piano, she wants to play this one, because it's, I think, the kind of piano she would have played. And it is eventually the piano that he gives her.
Oh, okay.
But but he can't, you can hear him yelling, "Don't play that piano!" And then he comes in, he's like, "Oh, no, you may play." And he lets her continue to play it. And so that's a nice little softening of Mr. Lawrence that you get to see. And Angela Lansbury is always a hoot. And Aunt March is always ridiculous. So I think it was a good casting choice to put her in Aunt March because, Aunt March is severe. Talk about severe. Yes. Aunt March is severe. So she was a fun choice. And I think she played off of like Catherine Newton really well, who plays Amy. I think just all the relationships in this one were really well done because, it's the same thing with like Joe and Amy where they do grow up and eventually there's no longer that sort of childish bickering. There's just those quiet moments of, oh, I don't understand why, Amy doesn't have to be here for this. And, so it's very good. I highly recommend.
I will stick it on my list.
Please leave it on your list.
Alrighty. So now I guess we move on to 2018, which is a modern take on it. And it stars Sarah Davenport as Jo, Lucas Grabeel as Laurie, and then Leah Thompson as Marmee.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna be stuck on Lucas Gabriel for a second. From High School Musical?
Yes.
I don't like it.
I didn't either.
Okay, good. I didn't watch it, so I'm relying on you for this one.
So this adaptation has a very Jo focus. You're not really getting a whole lot of look at the other sisters and their lives and whatnot, which even in the novel, you get more of a look at the other sisters than you do in this adaptation, it's not a bad thing. Most people connect with Jo more than any of the other girls anyways, but that is how this is. And this one, like the 2019, does the flashbacks juxtaposed with the end of the story. So you get that, it's really strengthening that meta trope that is used in the novel. Because of Lucas Grabeel's past of being High School Musical, even though technically Laurie is a musical character, we know that he has an education in music and that he can play things very well. It really just felt like they were trying to showcase the fact and holding on to that fact that he was in High School Musical.
12 years ago?
This isn't...
Probably longer. Yeah, it would be longer than that.
It was at least 10 years.
Well,
at least from the first one.
I went and saw the third one when it came out in theaters with my little group of, drama friends. And that was my senior year of high school. So,
yeah. So it at least been 10 years from the first one when this particular adaptation came out. And it really just felt like they were holding on to that instead of actually strengthening the character of Laurie. And I didn't like it.
Yeah.
We get to meet Professor Bear at the top of the movie. Because of that whole flashback juxtaposition thing,
okay.
Our first moment of meeting Jo, you also get to meet Frederick Bear because he is one of her college professors.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
And so you get to see him criticize her work in a classroom setting.
In front of everybody?
Yeah.
That's rude. I wasn't ready for that.
And so it's a weird way to go about it. But at the same time, and I don't know how much of this is just the way that the actors look, it doesn't look like it's that stark of an age difference. Because the actor who plays Professor Bear, and his name escapes me at the moment, and I didn't write it down. I remember him not looking like he was 20 plus years older than the actress playing Jo.
Yeah, because he wouldn't have to be.
No, he wouldn't have to be. Especially with where they put him, because it's pretty much I don't remember if it was Jo was working on her graduate degree or if she was just at the end of her bachelor's. Either way, it's not like she was a freshman in college having a relationship with a professor.
Yeah.
And even then, that doesn't really start until after the fact.
I would hope not. That's like conflict of interest right there, kids. Don't date your teachers.
I mean,
Until they're not your
seriously.
teachers anymore. You can date them afterwards.
And then there are some other like YouTube stars that are in this adaptation. You have Stuart Edge, who is a relatively known prankster on YouTube. He plays John Brooke. And he felt really weird to see him play John Brooke. But at the same time, it was like, oh, you actually can do other things other than make people feel like idiots. That's great. And then we have Madeline Thatcher, who plays Kate Morland in the Kate Morland Chronicles. She plays one of Meg's friends in this adaptation.
Good for her.
And I love her.
Good for her.
That's probably like one of the only truly positive things I could say. I mean, I also love Leah Thompson as Marmee. I think she's a great Marmee.
Mm-hmm.
But
everybody loves Leah Thompson.
She does great.
You can't not like Leah Thompson.
Those are like my main like key thoughts on the 2018. And
I don't know. You said Lucas Gabriel was in it. I'm done. I'm not even gonna try.
It's like I knew he was there
too because I've seen the trailer, but like I think my brain was like, throw that away.
It's like I'm not gonna tell you that you should watch it. If you're interested in seeing a modern take, it might not be bad. This is an adaptation where Mr. March is a little bit more present.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't have anything else to really say about him, so. But he is, in fact, casted, and they're like, you do get to see him at some point in time.
Yeah.
All right. Last but certainly not least, the 2019 version.
Yes.
That Greta Gerwig wrote and directed.
I will talk about this version for days. I love this version, and it's partially because I love Greta Gerwig. I've seen a lot of her other stuff. I like the way, and again, this does what the 2018 one does, is where you start in later in life and then you go back. But it's interesting because, and I've watched a lot of content behind the scenes for this, and I know you have too, because we talked about it when it first came out.
Yeah.
But, you know, everything that Greta does is very pronounced in the differences between now and back then. You know, when they were kids, it's all a little lighter, it's all a little sunnier, everything's very specifically done. She filmed it with 2 separate filters on them because she wanted you to see the stark contrast in their lives as younger and older.
Yeah.
But we can start with just the cast, because this is a star-studded cast.
Oh yeah.
Oh my.
Absolutely.
Gosh.
And it even has some that like are a little up and coming as well.
Yes, but everybody to me does a really great job.
Oh, absolutely.
In this. So Saoirse Ronan plays Jo March. Emma Watson plays Meg, which I think she's the only one that I ever have like a moment with when I'm watching the movie, because I don't think they did a great job of ensuring that she didn't accidentally become British. There are moments when I rewatched it, I was like, that sounded extremely British, ma'am. Extremely British.
Not everybody has the gift of hiding their accent.
But they have coaches for that.
They do.
Florence Pugh plays Amy March, and she's my favorite Amy.
And before this adaptation, I had no idea that Florence Pugh was even an actress.
Even a person. You were like, who is this?
I love her as Amy.
Oh. Out
of all the adaptations, she is my favorite Amy.
Yeah. I agreed. And a lot of that, I think, too, has to do with the way that Greta Gerwig wrote her. Eliza Scanlon plays Beth.
Again, another person I had no idea who it was.
She's fabulous.
She is. But I had no idea who she was before then.
Laura Dern plays Marmee, and I think she's probably the best Marmee. And that is my opinion.
She's definitely and we really only have like
4.
I only have 2 other Marmies to compare her to, because I haven't seen the 2017. And I guess you too, because you didn't see the 2018.
Yeah.
I definitely like Laura Dern more than Susan Sarandon.
I think she's got more of that sort of motherly, just to everybody thing that Marmee has.
Right. And also, and I don't know how much of this is just because of other things I've seen Laura Dern in, when Marmee tells Jo that she has struggled with her anger, I believe it way more coming from Laura Dern. I don't know why.
Timothy Chalamet plays Laurie. And I do think he plays an excellent Laurie. And a lot of that, I think, too, has to do with his chemistry with Saoirse because they've been in things together before.
Mm-hmm. They have excellent chemistry.
They have excellent chemistry.
And in all honesty, I would say, from my own perspective, I know you're not a fan of Winona Ryder and Christian Bale as
I'm
Laurie
just not a fan
and
of Christian
Joe.
Bale. I love Winona Ryder.
Okay. I think the chemistry that Christian Bale and Winona Ryder have is very equal to the chemistry that Saoirse Ronan and Timothée Chalamet have.
I won't deny that. I just don't like him as Laurie. That doesn't mean they don't have great chemistry. It just means I don't like him as Laurie. The quite possibly the most well-known actress in this adaptation is Meryl Streep as Aunt March.
She's hilarious.
And she is so funny. She hates everybody except for like Amy. And even then she's kind of like, you are a silly girl.
It's honestly really great. Just like how blunt she is.
Oh, so wonderful. Again, Greta Gerwig wrote this spectacularly.
She did.
She really did a great job. I've listened to a couple of podcasts with her about the process she went through when she was writing this. And she loves this story so much and was desperate. They started working on this in 2013.
Oh, wow.
And then
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and then she was signed on to write it in 2014. And she finished in 2018. And then she was, she finished it in 2017. Then she was signed on to direct it in 2018. And then they filmed it in 2018. But she really wanted to write this way. She had such a vision for it. And she talks about, obviously, you see a lot of each girl in this adaptation. You get a lot of, it's not all about Joe. Again, it is a good chunk of it about Joe because it is technically more about Joe when you're reading the book.
It's also technically Joe writing it.
Yeah. So. But you get a lot more, I think, behind people like Meg, and you get a lot more behind Amy because Greta said in a podcast that rereading the novel as an adult, she realized that she understood Amy a lot more than she did when she was a kid, and that she sort of had this understanding of Amy.
Okay.
And that she wanted to bring that to light, that Amy, because a lot of people look at Amy and they're like, oh, she was awful. She was so mean to Joe. She, quit painting and, was just perfectly fine with being a wife. And Amy's a realist a lot more than Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Because Amy realizes, I want to be a painter. And there's a great scene. I love that scene between her and Timothy in the art studio of, I know that I will never be great. And I'm fine with that. I'm content. I know what my life is. I know what my purpose is. And if it's not to be a painter, then that's fine. And this is I could quote this movie probably backwards and forwards. I think it's so well written. James Norton plays John Brooke, and he's adorable.
I love him.
He's just so precious. He was in War and Peace with Lily James, and he was excellent in that.
And he also was the lead role in Grantchester, a detective series, and I love it. And he's done like a number of other things. He was
in Death Comes to Pemberley too. He played the guy that Georgiana ends up with, whose name is escaping me.
He did.
He did, right? Yeah.
It's been a minute since I've seen that, but yeah. I would have to say this is probably my favorite Mr. Lawrence.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Cooper.
He's so good.
So good.
He's so there's just this genteel part of him that I think you see more in this adaptation.
It's definitely a stark contrast from the first thing I ever saw Chris Cooper in, which was October Sky.
Wow. That is a stark contrast.
Right? And I think it's one of the things that almost endears the character a little bit more to me in the way that he portrays it, because it's weird because you can't really compare those two characters because they are two completely different characters from two completely different worlds.
Yeah.
But sometimes being able to see an actor's range that way can change your perspective on a character, and I think that's great.
Oh, I agree. I like this version, to me, is the version that does the best of transitioning Laurie's affection from Joe to Amy.
I would agree.
There's a lot more of those little moments of seeing him and Amy together in Paris where you're like, oh. And you sort of see Laurie have those moments. And again, I think that's the excellent writing. And then obviously Timmy. I called him Timmy, which is what Greta called him because I've listened to so many things of her talking about him. Timothy, because I don't know him. And Florence is, again, like he has great chemistry with Saoirse, but he also has great chemistry with Florence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, there's this great moment of the switch of him being like, oh, Jo is kind of my sister. And Amy, who I sort of thought was my little sister, is actually a woman now. Oh, I think he sort of has that moment of like, oh my God. When they run into each other at the beginning of the film in Paris, I think that you see it there too. You sort of see Amy and you see the crush that Amy's always had on Laurie. Because we haven't really discussed that Amy is always, she wants to make him a cast of her foot that one time. It's so great.
I think the way that Florence's portrayal of Amy, and I'm sure some of this comes from the way that Greta wrote it, but the way that she just puts him in his place.
Oh my God.
Of like, no, I'm not going to be second best to Jo. I've always been second best to Jo, which also just shows the relationship that Amy and Jo have throughout the entire novel, of how Amy's trying her hardest to be as good as Jo because she looks up to Jo so much.
Yeah.
And to an extent, I think she looks up to Jo more than she looks up to Meg, which is interesting considering Meg is the oldest, so you would think that all of them would look up to Meg.
Yeah.
But they don't.
But I think there's this, I think Amy wishes she could have the sort of vibrancy that Jo has, because Jo kind of steals the room whenever she comes in. I think Amy, and as she has those conversations with Laurie several times, that she realizes she's not Jo.
Yeah.
And she looks at that as a bad thing. And I think she thinks that, Laurie's settling. He's like, well, you'll do. And
right.
I
mean, there's that entire like conversation of why marrying out of convenience
oh my God.
is a horrible decision.
Oh my God. I love this movie. I'm just playing it over in my head right now. Yeah, I mean, she talks about, I understand who I am as a woman, and if I have to marry out of convenience, then I marry out of convenience because I'm never going to have my own money. All my money will be my husband's. My children will be my husband's.
And I think out of the four girls, Amy fully accepts the responsibility that to really help her family the most, it is most beneficial for her to marry rich.
Yeah, because at this point, Meg didn't marry rich. Jo doesn't want to get married, according to her. Beth is not going to ever marry because at this point, obviously, she's not dead, but Beth doesn't do anything. She stays at home. She goes to the Lawrence house and plays the piano, and she's content to do that. She's happy to do that. And she's gotten sick.
And she also serves like her community.
Yes.
And so it's not like she never ever leaves the area of the two homes, that because the Lawrences and the Marches are next door neighbors. So it's not like it's super far for her to go. But it's not like Beth goes to parties or anything where she could meet a potential suitor.
Yeah, and she doesn't do the sort of grand adventures that her sisters do. Meg goes to the city for the cotillion and makes all these rich, fancy friends and sort of pretends to be, she becomes Daisy for a little while and wants to be that sort of life, and then ends up falling in love with, sort of a penniless teacher and making bad decisions as a wife because she still wishes that she had money. And that their whole thing of the little fight they have about the fabric, and then later he's like, no, send it off, and she's like, I sold it. It's great. But it's true marriage to me. That's such a good representation of marriage. You are going to have fights about things, and
there is a level of like, you have to accept that you have to give things up just as much as your spouse has to give things up.
Oh yeah.
And it's just such an honest look, but at the same time, you see the struggles where Meg feels the pressure of the fact that they have 2 children because they had twins. And like while John is trying his hardest to provide for his family, which is all he's really trying to do, it slips his mind that he also needs to make sure that he is making sure that his wife feels loved and cared for more than just, oh, well, you take care of our children.
Yeah. And Joe goes to New York to be a writer and to make money for the family. And, Beth would never do that. And Amy goes all the way to Paris and Europe with Aunt March. Beth isn't. That's not who she is.
No.
I mean, out of all of this, listening to like stuff that Greta's talked about and rewatching this over and over again, to me, Amy is my favorite character because of the growth that she goes on from being this child that burns Joe's partially written novel and, falls into the ice and gets mad about silly things and doesn't want to go stay with Aunt March when Beth has scarlet fever, to this adult who looks at, I would be respected if I couldn't be loved. She's very realistic. She understands where she is in the time period that she's in. And to me, this adaptation is gorgeous.
Oh, absolutely.
There's this, every girl sort of has their own color. Every girl sort of has their own style. And all of that is, again, intentional. And it won an Oscar for Best Costume. The only Oscar they won.
The costume design of this has a modern twist and kind of tailors to the individualization of the girls.
Yeah.
And so, like, if I remember correctly, like, Beth's is probably the most true to time period, but that is also where, like, Beth doesn't want to be noticed. She'd much rather blend in, and where Joe's has a little bit of a boyish twist to it because Joe errs on the side of tomboy. And then like Meg and Amy tend to be a little bit more prim and proper because they kind of dive into that type of things.
Yeah, and Greta talked about how, like, with Saoirse, she wanted her to be sort of androgynous, and she and Timothy actually share clothes. There are things that you see each of them wearing that the other one will later wear. And she said that Saoirse was the one person that she would put the clothes in her trailer and let her put it on however she wanted to put it on. Because Jo is not somebody, she doesn't wear hoops. She doesn't wear a corset. So she was sort of just like, put it on. Figure out the way you think Jo would wear it. Because she literally like started working on this, talked to Saoirse about it, and Saoirse was like, oh, I'm playing Jo. There wasn't like a question of it. She was like, oh, cool, I'm going to come play Jo for you.
Yeah.
And I think Greta really understands this novel.
And you mentioned that Amy is your favorite character, and is that just because of this adaptation, or is that just like as a whole from the book, like Amy is your favorite?
I think now Amy is my favorite character. I think, again, it's that sort of thing where I reread this and I've rewatched adaptations of it, and I've realized that in my personal opinion, I think Amy has the most growth.
Gotcha.
And I think that Amy is the most realistic in her situation and understands what's expected of her, but also is still feminist in that I'm still going to do the things I want to do. I'm just going to do them while still doing the things that society expects me to do. So I think that's why. And I don't think that young me would say that.
Gotcha.
But I think dealing with it now, Amy is my favorite character.
Gotcha. See, Amy's still not my favorite character. I still find her...
That's okay.
...massively annoying.
That's okay.
But it was this adaptation that gave me a new respect for Amy. And one of it, like, going back to what I mentioned with the 94, where it felt like the limes were her defining life's, like, accomplishment.
Stupid limes.
If for lack of a better word.
Jesus.
Like, I feel like Europe was the defining thing for Amy.
Yeah,
and I think that's true in the book, and it was definitely portrayed very well in this adaptation.
That's where she grows up.
Yes. And because you have the whole, like, Amy literally almost marries Fred.
Yeah, Fred Vaughn.
Vaughn.
Fred Vaughn, everybody.
She met through Laurie.
Mhm.
And then he essentially begs her to not marry him. And it's like, why do you care? What do you have against him? He's your friend.
Yeah, right. You literally, this is your fault.
Exactly.
Sort of that moment. Yeah.
But I honestly think Always and Forever Joe will be my favorite.
That makes sense for you, though.
And a lot of it is because I identify with her. To an extent, I wish I could be more like Joe because I am not the life of the party when I enter the room. I'm not going to be like big and bold when I enter a room unless I'm like comfortable with those people in the room.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to be, oh, here's a room full of strangers. Let me be the life of the party. Like, no, that's just not me. But because of my passion for writing and the fact that it is my lifelong dream to be a published author, I connect with Joe on that level. And like, literally when Amy burns Joe's book, I'm ready to murder Amy because it's like, honey, you cannot do that. That is so much time and effort. And especially in that day and age, it's not like, oh, it's just easy to make copies. Like, there's just so much.
I see that for you, though. I think that I feel like both of us, I'm going to identify with Amy, which a lot of people are going to be like, why would you ever want to identify with Amy? But I do think in a lot of ways I identify with Amy, which is probably why I like her so much. But I think as a woman reading this, you kind of have to identify with one of the March sisters.
And I think there are different moments. Like, Meg is probably the one I identify with the least.
Yeah.
Just because...
Oh my God, yes.
It's not my dream to be a homemaker, to be a wife, and all that jazz. Am I okay if that happens? Sure. But it's never been, like, my lifelong dream. Yeah. And so I don't really understand why Meg wants the things that she wants or does the things that she does. Because I don't want that.
Yeah. No, I agree.
I understand Beth because, as previously established, in a room full of people I don't know, I tend to be on the shyer side.
Yeah.
And then I can understand where Amy's coming from, but it's not like, yeah, I specifically connect with this thing because it's not like I live in a society where it is my job to marry in order to be a functioning member of society.
Time period, yeah.
So, and that seems to be a little bit of the function of Amy, where she has accepted this and she is willing to do it.
Yeah.
Because, and I think it's funny at the same time, it's so true when Aunt March makes the statement to Amy that she is, like, it is her job to save the family.
She is the saving grace of the family because her sister married a poor man and Joe is wild and, you know, Beth
will never be wanted by anybody.
Yes, and Beth will never really do anything.
Exactly.
So, yeah, it's just truly, I mean, I could do a whole episode about this, but we don't have that much time.
One thing I will say about all of the adaptations, like I had mentioned about how the fact that we don't necessarily get to see Mr. March a whole lot in really any of the adaptations. And there are literally some adaptations where he's just not casted at all. In the book, there are 2 aunts.
Yes.
That the March girls have, but it's only Aunt Josephine March, who Joe is named after. Which I think is hilarious that
poor Joe.
Aunt March despises Joe, even though, like, literally she was given your name, honey.
It's your namesake.
But, you know, whatever. But we don't get to see the other Aunt March, which, if I remember correctly, let me look back at my notes real fast. I want to say that the only time we really get to see the other aunt is around, I want to say it's at least around Meg's wedding, and then I think again with I want to say it's the other aunt that actually takes Amy to Europe.
That takes Amy to Paris or to Europe.
Yes, it's Aunt Carol. Not Aunt Joe, but Aunt Carol that gets to take Amy. And I mean, I'm sure for casting purposes, they just
It was
decided
easier
to make
do
it
with one.
It was easier to make it
Which
one
seems to be the
character.
theme. Almost every adaptation does that.
Right. It's not like
They sort of wrap two aunts into one.
right. It's not like with the Bingley sisters, where in some adaptations you get two because there are two, and other adaptations you just get one because
Yeah.
only one actually plays
Does anything,
an
really.
integral part. And so I think that is interesting that is a consistency through all of them, where one aunt just seems to be like forgotten.
This was a fun one, though. I was happy
Yes.
to sort of go back to this.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, I really like Little Women. Such a good story, and such a popularly feminist story for when it was written.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, and so here's, some fun tidbits about the book. Initially, when Alcott wrote it, Jo was not ever going to be married. It was never Alcott's intention for Jo to be married. Only reason why Jo gets married at the end of the book is because the publisher told her no one would buy the book if Jo didn't get married.
which happens in the 2019 version. You get to see that.
Mhm.
And then you sort of get, like, Frederick leaves, he's going to California, and then Jo is sitting down with the publisher who's like, she has to be married at the end. And so you sort of see the rewritten end of the novel with her ending up with Frederick.
Right. Which, in a sense, makes you question if this was all a story that Jo wrote, but at the same time it's based
On real
on
life.
her life.
Yeah. It's very meta.
Does she actually end up with Frederick Bear?
But you don't know.
It is a question that you may never have the answer to.
Makes it fun.
Unless they decide to make Little Men or Jo's Boys, because
I mean, this movie was popular enough for it.
oh, and I think Greta Gerwig could totally
Greta
Make
Gerwig
it great.
can do almost anything in my mind. I love her. So there's that.
because with that, like Jo has two sons
Mm-hmm.
with Frederick Bear.
Yeah.
That's something that we learn in the end of the novel, which sets up for the companion books of Little Men and Jo's Boys.
Yep. Which we're not gonna read them. Just read them. We're not gonna go get crazy about those.
No,
Um.
we're just gonna leave it with Little Women.
Yeah. Just Little Women. We're gonna talk about today. Thanks for listening to us.
Obviously, thank you to Louisa May Alcott, who wrote this gem of a novel that, honestly, I think like Anne of Green Gables, it's a very informative and important novel for young women.
I agree completely. And thank you to everybody who's taken in a adaptation of this. You, whether we liked it or not, you went out and you did it, and that's impressive. I'm gonna specifically thank Greta Gerwig because I love her. That's just me, though. Everybody did a good job, though.
We've obviously voiced our opinions about the things that we did not like
Yes.
for these adaptations,
Yeah, that's-
but this was a mostly positive episode.
yeah, I agree. Thank you, Zakaka, for your wonderful, beautiful artwork. We use it consistently, and we would be nowhere without it. Well, we'd be somewhere. It just wouldn't be as pretty.
It would not look as good as it does.
No, we're not that talented, either of us.
Thanks for tuning into League of Lit. If you have any suggestions for an episode, feel free to leave a comment on leagueoflit.tumblr.com.